You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I'm your host, Tom Daniel. Hey, if you grew up thinking the Beatles simply wrote better songs than everybody else, you're not wrong. They did. But that explanation is too small for what actually happened between 1962 and 1970. Four young men from Liverpool did something much more rare than just writing a bunch of hits. They completely changed the rules of the game while the game was still in progress. They took ideas that already existed and pushed them further than most of their contemporaries dared to try, and then made the results so commercially successful that the rest of the industry had no choice but to follow. Just like Beethoven, they steamrolled everybody that came before them and shaped everybody that came after them. And just like Beethoven, they proved that you could be artistically significant and commercially successful at the same time. On this episode, we're going to walk through the most consequential of those decisions. Not as a greatest hits countdown or like a top 10 list, nothing like that, but as a set of practical innovations that permanently altered how songs are written, recorded, packaged, performed, broadcast, and sold. Some of them you already know, and a few of them you may have underestimated. All of them are still audible, and as usual, I'm not allowed to play a single example of any of it. So let's start with something that looks almost ordinary now, the short promotional film called The Music Video. In May of 1966, the Beatles filmed a pair of clips for the single Paperback Writer and its B-side, Rain. Michael Lindsay Hogg directed. They shot part of it inside Abbey Road and part of it on the grounds of Chiswick House in London. Now, the idea was simple and slightly desperate. The band's schedule had become impossible to follow, so instead of flying to every television program that wanted them, they could just mail a film of themselves performing the new songs. George Harrison later said, with that same dry Liverpool understatement he always had, that they invented MTV. Earlier film performances existed. Jazz shorts, Elvis numbers tucked inside feature films. But the 1966 clips of Paperback Writer and Rain helped establish the dedicated, standalone, original promotional film of a current single as a standard tool. And the practice became industry routine long before cable channels formalized it. Every time a band releases a video instead of climbing onto a plane, they are still living in the solution the Beatles found for scheduling nightmares. Now, the same period rewrote the economics of a live performance. On the 15th of August, 1965, the Beatles walked onto a stage built over second base at Shea Stadium in New York. More than 55,000 people were in the seats. Tickets ran from $4.50 to $5.75. Wow. The night's gross was a little over $300,000, an industry record that stood for years. The sound system was terrible. The set only lasted about half an hour, and the screaming made the music impossible to hear. And none of that mattered. The concert proved that a rock act could fill a Major League Baseball stadium and generate corresponding revenue. Elvis had played large outdoor shows before, but nothing on this scale with this kind of cultural voltage. Stadium rock as a commercial model began in earnest that night at Shea Stadium. Chart dominance reached a point that has never been equaled under the Beatles. In the spring of 1964, they occupied the top 5 positions on the Billboard Hot 100 at the same time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Can't Buy Me Love, Twist and Shout, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Please Please Me. And they still had more titles lower on the same chart. Comparable sweeps happened at the same time in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. It wasn't just success. This was total market saturation. Boy, if you hated the Beatles, that was a bad week for you. There was nowhere you could go to get away from them. They were on top 40 stations, soul stations, even country stations. For a few weeks, the ordinary machinery of radio rotation and retail competition just stopped. One act owned the entire top of the mountain. By the middle of the decade, the real laboratory work was happening indoors, working with George Martin, their producer, and engineers like Jeff Emmerich and Ken Townsend. The Beatles began treating the recording studio as a compositional instrument rather than just a transparent box that captured sound. They popularized or refined a whole cluster of techniques that entered the common vocabulary almost overnight because of the Beatles. Artificial double tracking, so a singer doesn't have to sing everything twice. Deliberate guitar feedback used as an opening statement on the song I Feel Fine. Backwards tapes and vocals, most famously First Time on Rain. Tape loops and early sampling methods on Tomorrow Never Knows. Creative close miking of drums. Varispeed, flanging, phasing, compression, and the routing of a human voice through a Leslie speaker cabinet that's meant for the Hammond B3 organ. Few of these methods were invented from absolute zero. Many had experimental or classical antecedents, but what the Beatles did was make them audible, attractive, and commercially viable on records that sold in tens of millions. After Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, the studio itself became a place where you could construct songs that could not be performed live in any conventional sense. That single shift from documentation to construction changed the job description of every serious recording artist who came after them. And that realization led to one of the most consequential decisions any popular act has ever made at the height of its power. They stopped touring. They walked away from the stage. Their final scheduled public concert took place on the 29th of August, 1966, at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Exhaustion. The inability to hear themselves on stage. The practical impossibility of reproducing the new studio material live. Safety threats. And just simple boredom. All of it played a part. After more than 6 years of nearly continuous performance, they just walked away. The choice was almost unheard of. Nobody had ever done that before. It freed them to work exclusively in the studio, and in doing so, accelerated the larger shift of popular music's center of gravity from the stage to the recorded album. You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Tom Daniels Show. And hey, am I imagining things, or did Mary Mac just turn a tape loop into a second line parade? Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. And when the Beatles returned to the studio after Candlestick Park, they began treating the album itself as the primary artistic statement rather than a collection of singles with some filler. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in June of '67, is often called the first concept album. But that claim needs a little clarification. Frank Zappa's Freak Out and the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds had already explored thematic coherence and studio ambition the year before, 1966. John Lennon himself later said the Pepper concept didn't really hold up, and that the record only worked mostly because the band just said it worked. Fair enough. What Sgt. Pepper did achieve, though, was to make the idea of the rock album as a unified artistic statement, complete with framing device, continuous sequencing, elaborate packaging, and no advanced singles. They made it culturally dominant. I repeat, no singles were ever released from Sgt. Pepper. That's astonishing. There's the gatefold sleeve when you open it up, the printed lyrics on the back cover, which was the first time anybody had ever tried that. They inserted cardboard cutouts into the album. Even the looped gibberish nonsense in the run-out groove. All of it treated the physical object as part of the work itself. Now, publishers initially resisted printing the lyrics for fear of lost sheet music sales. The practice now is industry standard. In the same stretch of years, the band also normalized the double album as a serious vehicle and proved that a 7.5-minute single like Hey Jude could succeed commercially even when it strained the rigid 3-minute format of AM radio. So let's talk about that. Those longer forms helped push another structural change. American AM radio stations of the late 60s preferred short singles that fit predictable hourly rotations. They wanted the 3-minute single. When Hey Jude arrived, it was 7.5 minutes long. Many stations just chopped it off at the 3-minute mark and denied listeners the na-na-na coda that was the whole point of the song. At the same time, highly innovative programmers such as Tom Donahue at KSAN in San Francisco were developing freeform and progressive FM radio formats that favored album tracks, extended pieces, and that famous commercial-free block of music. The Beatles didn't invent FM radio, let's be clear, but the mismatch between their later work and AM constraints supplied one very public argument for the migration of serious music programming from AM over to FM. Within a decade, the functions of AM and FM had completely swapped places. On the 25th of June, 1967, the Beatles participated in Our World, the first ever live global satellite television broadcast. Multiple countries linked by orbiting satellites. An estimated audience of more than 400 million people watching one television show at the same time in 1967. Wow. The Beatles closed the British segment of the show with a live studio performance of the song All You Need Is Love, which was written specifically by John for the occasion. They did not invent the technology of live satellite television. They simply supplied the most memorable musical centerpiece of the historic transmission and demonstrated that a single performance could be experienced simultaneously across continents. That global simultaneity is something we take for granted now. In 1967, it was still a wonder. And then there's the label. Business structures shifted as well, though not always gracefully. In 1968, the Beatles launched Apple Records as part of the larger Apple Corps enterprise. The label was meant to be both a creative outlet for the Beatles and a home for other artists. In practice, the arrangement was a little complicated. The group remained under contract to EMI Records, and Apple functioned largely as an imprint distributed by EMI and Capitol Records. American releases carried the Apple logo, while the underlying rights stayed with the major labels. The subsequent managerial conflicts, the dual appointments of Alan Klein and the Eastman family as rival managers at the same time, and the cascade of lawsuits that followed made Apple more of a cautionary example as much as a pioneering one. Other bands got that idea, but they said, yeah, let's do that, but let's don't do it like that. Still, the idea of a major artist-controlled label at that scale entered the industry conversation and has been revisited by ambitious acts ever since. Now, beyond the institutional and technical changes, the Beatles also expanded the sonic palette available to Western popular music. George Harrison's adoption of the sitar and other Indian instruments beginning with Norwegian wood, continuing through Love You Too and Within You Without You, and related experiments introduced drone, raga-derived modes, and non-Western timbres into the mainstream. The same years saw the routine incorporation of classical string arrangements into rock and pop songs, most famously the string quartet on Yesterday and the orchestral climax of the song A Day in the Life. Later, George Harrison brought an early Moog synthesizer into the Abbey Road sessions, placing the instrument in a high-profile rock context. None of these borrowings were unique in absolute terms. Their presence on records that sold in tens of millions simply accelerated their acceptance by everyone else. Taken together, the innovations by the Beatles form a coherent pattern. The Beatles repeatedly moved the center of activity away from the live stage and the 3-minute single toward the recording studio, the long-playing album, and the packaged artistic statement. They demonstrated that a popular act could control, or at least contest, packaging, sequencing, visual promotion, and even the length of its own releases. They showed that stadiums could be filled, that satellites could carry a single performance worldwide, and that the recorded object itself could be treated as more like a container for hit singles. Not every experiment succeeded. Not every claim of absolute priority survives close inspection, but what remains is a body of work and a set of practices that permanently altered the expectations surrounding popular music. I often tell my students, I don't care who you listen to or what you listen to, it connects in some way back to the Beatles. All artists later inherited the landscape that the Beatles helped redraw. The album was a primary instrument. The studio was an instrument. The promotional film as a standard tool. The stadium as a viable venue. And a far wider range of sounds and forms considered commercially viable. That inheritance is still audible every time a band releases a video instead of boarding a plane. Every time an album is sequenced as continuous experience rather than a package of singles. Every time a producer treats the console as a musical instrument, every time a stadium fills up with people who came to hear just one band, and every time a song longer than 3 minutes is allowed to take its full shape. The Beatles didn't invent the modern music industry. They just made so many of its current assumptions feel inevitable that we forget somebody once had to invent them, and it was the same band that did almost all of them. 4 musicians from Liverpool, a producer who trusted them, and a few years of relentless curiosity were enough to redraw the entire map. The rest of us are still walking the roads they paved. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening. Keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune into the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know.